So Ryan,
all right, we might get started. Oh, look, it's so fabulous to have all these people in the room. We're running a little bit late today, in part because we were waiting for Yvonne Weldon, who is a Wiradjuri woman, originally from Cowra. I'm going to become a teacher again very soon. Okay, if people can take their seats who have seats, that would be fantastic, thank you. And there's a few seats up the front here as well. There's a lot of meeting and greeting going on up the back there. Okay, we're starting. Well, the reason we're a bit delayed is because we had scheduled Yvonne Weldon to welcome us to country, and we just can't get into contact with her. And Yvonne is a chair of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council. So if Yvonne turns up, we'll obviously make space in the program for her. But instead, I've asked Robin Quiggin, who's the Deputy Social Justice Commissioner, to do an acknowledgement instead. And she might explain to you the difference between a welcome and an acknowledgement. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Megan. As Megan said, I'm the Deputy Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner. I'm also a Wiradjuri woman. I'm a guest on the country of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'm not entitled to do a welcome to country. I'm not authorised to do a welcome to country. I'm not a traditional owner, but I can acknowledge. And I ask us to all reflect for a moment on the fact that we are here as guests of the Gadigal people, the traditional owners, Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and ask us to think about the fact that Gadigal people are still here, traditional owners, on their country, descended from thousands of years of occupation here, thousands of years of exercise of cultural rights, of economic rights, of social rights, and their ancestors are still here among us, even though we live in this big built environment now up here on the third floor. Gadigal people are, and their ancestors, still care for this country. So I want to acknowledge that and ask us to all reflect on that. And I hope that, perhaps Yvonne will be here later to actually properly welcome us, but I will hand back to Megan. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. That was fantastic, and a great reminder that this country has a very deep and rich history. Also, I just wanted to say we're here today to launch the Children's Rights Report for 2016. And as many of you know, my reports each year outline what I've done in the year and tracks the progress of recommendations that I've made since 2013. So this one's the biggest yet. It's like really thick tome. We have managed to do a bit of an executive summary as well, which hopefully will be helpful to people. And during 2016, I focused in particular on how the needs and interests of children and young people in youth detention centres could be considered and monitored under a thing called the United Nations Optional Protocol to the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel and Inhumane Degrading Treatment or Punishment, OPCAT for short. And what this agreement would do is put in place a national oversight system in Australia, and that would lift the standards generally across Australia. And so that's what the report is mainly about. And it would, and in doing that, we would have an independent monitoring, preventative mechanism that would monitor what's going on in Australia's juvenile justice centres and if there are any children in adult prison as well. but also that OPCAT obviously covers all places of closed detention where adults and children are. I do want to say that we have a young person here today who is still in custody, and if you could respect her privacy, and she will be speaking to us later, but if you could respect her privacy and not take photos of her or film her in any way, I would really appreciate that. She's been very brave to come here today and share her story, and I think we need to respect her privacy. And so I guess I would also say mobile phones off. In case an emergency, somebody with a hat, colourful hat, will come in and tell us to go somewhere or do something, and I will follow them, and so will you. Parts of this event will be filmed and photographed, so if you don't want to be filmed or photographed, just let me know and we'll make sure that you're not. And I also now have the pleasure, I also want to acknowledge a few other people in the room. My former colleague Mick Gooder, who was the Social Justice Commissioner here at the Commission, who is now with the Northern Territory Royal Commission. So it's great to have you here, Mick. Obviously, Gillian Triggs, the President of the Commission, is here today. Luke Freudenstein from down in Redfern Command, and our two young people, Jessie and Kit. Thank you for coming. But also acknowledge Dorothy Hodnott, who was the 2014 Human Rights Medal and who is the principal of Holroyd High School. And does fabulous work out there. There's many other people in the room that are distinguished in so many ways, but I'd be here all day if I named you all. So at this point, I'd just like to ask Gillian Triggs to welcome us here to the Human Rights Commission. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is always, I think this is my favourite event that we do at the Australian Human Rights Commission each year. It is one of Megan's responsibilities to report. It is a term this year, but it's also one that celebrates this wonderful artwork, which I think is really a profound, thoughtful piece. But it's also wonderful to have in this commission facility some of the artwork of the young people that Megan visits. So thank you all very much for coming. My job really is to welcome you all today. Thank you, Robin, for your acknowledgement of country. And I too, of course, acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and respect their elders. It's wonderful to have so many people with us. I would like again to recognise Commander Luke Freudenstein. It's wonderful to have you here. Mrs. Hudendot, who won the Human Rights Medal a couple of years ago, some young people here, and of course my colleagues, Commissioners Alistair McEwen, Robin as Deputy Commissioner. It's really lovely to have you here. Well, Megan's been, I think, the first National Human Rights Commissioner for children, and she has been with us now for about 3 years, and she's having an enormous impact in being able to speak at a federal level about the rights of children. And she's really drilled down into some of the things that are the most troubling for us at the Human Rights Commission. Her report is a wonderful piece of work. There's a lot of accurate research in that report. It's worth reading, but I think it's also wonderful that each year she produces a special version for the children. It's clear, it can be read by anybody, and it really makes all the points that we talk about at the more complex level of human rights. But what I wanted to do today, in addition, of course, to congratulating Megan for her work, and for, of course, the staff of the Commission who have worked so hard on producing this report, but I wanted to tell you about two matters that have been of particular importance to me and I think my colleagues at the Commission, that underscore the failure of the Australian government to meet the responsibilities that we have to children. And it comes back, of course, to that important human rights document, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is one of the most ratified human rights treaties in the world. Most countries in the world have ratified that treaty, but that treaty remains unimplemented into Australian law. Parliament has not passed that convention into law, and it remains a significant impediment to being able to achieve rights for those children. it's a national disgrace that we have not implemented this convention, and that has led to many of the stories that Megan's report tells, and two that I'll tell you about in a moment. But I'd also like to salute Megan's leadership in encouraging what we hope will be a ratification of the option protocol, because if that protocol were to be ratified, we would then have a monitoring system, both internationally and domestically, for all places of detention. But there are two stories that I wanted in particular to raise with you, because they have really influenced my thinking this year. And one is a matter on which the Commission reported more than 2 years ago. And we often put letters to the names of the people on whose behalf we report, but we'll call him James. And he was born at Titchikala, which is a remote Aboriginal community, 120 kilometres from Alice Springs. And he was born to an Aboriginal mother who had epilepsy and a brain injury. And James also was born with a cognitive disability. And his mother was unable to look after him, and he spent most of his childhood moving from one family member to another, but was a difficult child to manage and really unable to settle, a broken child. The government placed him in a child protection regime. And when he was 16 years old, he was told that finally he might be able to return to his country, to Titchikala, to live with an aunt who'd agreed to have him. And he waited all day for an uncle to drive him to that country. And he packed his backpack, he put in his Nintendo, a bottle of water, and some of his clothes, and he waited all day. The uncle came home and was intoxicated and was unable to drive him. A fight broke out, and our 16-year-old James took a kitchen knife and stabbed and killed his uncle. A horrible crime, and James was brought into custody, and because of his cognitive disability, he could not be tried, and he has been held in custody in a maximum security prison ever since. Initially in a juvenile facility, now in a maximum security prison in the Northern Territory. Now, what is particularly shocking is that as an adult, as a 22-year-old, through his guardian, he brought a complaint to the Australian Human Rights Commission. And that complaint was that he was being held arbitrarily, in fact being held, as is very often the case when we look at these complaints, typically Indigenous people and typically held with cognitive disabilities without charge of trial, but held for periods in maximum security prisons without the opportunity for proper support, and usually held for many years longer than they would ever have received had they been tried for that offence. Now, this young man was, according to his guardian, held in one of those steel restraint chairs that we've all seen in that iconic picture, held 16 times in order to calm him down and to give him drugs. Now, this matter, this case of James, was considered by the Australian Human Rights Commission, and we reported on this to Parliament more than 2 years ago. That report sunk like a stone. It was completely ignored, but it took the Four Corners CCT footage and the Four Corners program to show us all that horrifying picture, in this case of a juvenile in the Northern Territory being held with a spit hood over his head and held in steel restraint chairs. Now, I don't tell you this story only to be concerned that our reports do not always get the attention that they ought to get, but I tell the story because it's so important to bring the media with us to tell the stories, to move the hearts and minds, and as we know, the Prime Minister moved with great speed to establish the Northern Territory Royal Commission, and of course we're delighted to have him with us to be here for today, and we know he with Margaret White is carrying out a very arduous and important inquiry. We look forward to hearing those results. So that's a sad story. James is still held in a maximum security prison in an adult facility, and we don't really know what his future will be. But the other story is much more uplifting. As you know, with the staff of the Human Rights Commission, we embarked on the Forgotten Children's Report to look at the condition of children held in immigration detention as asylum seeker children. And we went to Christmas Island, a beautiful island, but in fact a very sinister one, because at that time it was holding many, many children. And while I was there, in one of my 3 visits to Christmas Island, I met a girl called Hani. She was 17 years old, and she was a Somali, and she stood out from all the others. She was a big Somali woman in wonderful African coloured clothes with shining white teeth and even more shining intelligence. And she told me that Somali was obviously her language. She was learning English and she wanted to be a poet. Well, she was held for a year on Christmas Island with virtually no access to education. She was brought back to Australia, where she was held in detention again for many months, but has now been released into the community. Her claim to refugee status has still not been assessed. She's still in a legal twilight zone and may never be allowed to settle in Australia, we don't know. But what is remarkable is that last week, she gave me the honour of launching her first published book of poetry. So I think she's a rich and rare example of what can happen. The human spirit really does survive these extraordinary conditions. But both stories are ones where we are treating children, juveniles, in the stories of their lives in ways that do not meet the aspirations of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So I really congratulate Megan and all the team for this report. Thank you all very much for coming, and I'm really very much looking forward to the other speakers that we have following me. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Gillian. It's always powerful to have people's individual stories illustrate what we need to do as adults and what our duty is, a duty of care is to young people. And it's true that as I go about the country talking to young people, no matter what situation they're in, no matter what background they're from, they're full of hope and aspiration and incredible resilience. And I think I'd like to invite one young man to the stand right now who demonstrates just that, who's been through, who's going to tell us a little bit about his story and his hopes and dreams and what he's doing to help his own community and other young people. Thank you, Jesse.
My name's Jesse Riley. I'm from the Waterloo Redfern community of Sydney, and I've lived there my whole life. Most recently, I started working with Tribe Warrior Association in the Clean Slate Without Prejudice program. They've helped me a lot along the way, go down the right path. Probably like 2 years ago, maybe, I would have been in a juvenile detention centre if it wasn't for Luke and Uncle Shane Phillips. I got referred to court through the police, and they've supported me, given me work, got me job ready. Now I work with the children in the community. I mentor the young kids to not go down the wrong path, and sort of want to help them, like just achieve their goals the same way I have, like through working with the police and playing sport. But yeah, like, I don't know, I'm sort of tongue twisted at the moment.
Let me ask you a couple of questions.
Yeah, that might be a bit better.
Okay, so how did you get to know Luke and Shane down in Redfern?
Oh, I've known Uncle Shane, like he's known me since I was a young lad, like since I was like 5 or 6 years old. He's known my parents for years. I only just, like I said, recently met Luke the last 3 years with the Redfern All Blacks. Played football with them, but yeah, most recently, like, he's given me a lot of opportunities, working with the kids, mentoring them, making sure I like keep them out of trouble.
And why do you think it's important to have young people with other young people?
Oh,
we're all old, Yeah,
no, like, I can relate to them more. Majority of the kids in the community are like all my family, so they're all like, like they're all relatives, and they just they say it. If another Indigenous person is leading the way and like leading by example, then they're gonna like actually take notice and listen, instead of like Luke. Like I never used to agree with Luke's decisions, and even any of the other police officers in Redfern, like I never used to talk to them. But now, if like Now the boys, they send me, they go, I shake Luke's hand in Redfern Street.
Okay.
And the boys, they come up and they go, oh, you know,
Luke's okay.
Yeah, he's shaking Luke's hand, like, but he's a copper.
So tell us about the Clean Slate program.
The Clean Slate program has been running for the last 5 years or 6 years, and they've helped a lot of the boys, like a lot of the youth in Redfern.
How do they get in
Waterloo.
trouble? What do they get in trouble for?
Well, majority of the charges were around our area were assault and robberies, or break and enters.
Okay.
So when they got locked up, we would go and see them and like transition through.
Oh, so you go in and visit them?
Yeah,
in
so we'll go visit them at the juvenile justice centres,
Okay.
help them transition through like coming out of jail and then back into the community.
And when do you think is the most risky time for kids?
Like straight after they're out, because they've got nothing, they've got no money, they've got no family support, and the only thing to do is to reoffend.
And that's where you can be a mentor to them and
Yeah.
help them.
That's my goal, is to make sure that no one in Waterloo Redfern like will reoffend, because they're all like my little cousins. So my little brother, he's one of the main reasons why I want to do it.
Okay.
So he's gone through that stage, through that time where he's gonna like choose his path, like whether it's gonna be like a good path or a bad path. And like when I was like at that stage, I didn't really have the support he has now.
Yeah.
So I had to find it, I had to ask for it. And
asking for it can be hard.
yeah, it's heaps hard. Like especially like in like a culture where like shame is a big thing, like a lot of our people are shamed, so
yeah,
it's not like a thing for me to go and ask the police for help or go and ask like someone else for help. I'll try to do it myself.
Yeah,
but
it's also a very boy thing to do.
Yeah, that's it. It's a very manly thing to like not ask for help. I think.
Well, Jessie, I think you're doing a fabulous job, and I want to thank you for what you're doing, and I hope there's more of you coming to help all those young people, because as I said, it's great that all those young people are just young people with lots of hopes and dreams, and if you can get them on the good path, that's fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jessie, so very much. And I look forward to learning more about you as you move through life and all your achievements. I'd also now like to introduce another young person who's come here today from one of our youth justice centres, and I remind you again, please don't take photos. Before I invite Kit up to the front, I want to say that Kit's made an important contribution to my report this year. In terms of her story, but also her artwork, which is on the back wall over there, and it's an HSC piece. And all these artworks were done by kids in detention environments. So I thank them all for that, and it's been such a rich way of getting stories out of young people who may not be able to articulate how they're feeling as well. But Kit, I'd like to ask you up at we just hear from young people themselves. There's nothing like it. I wanted to say a little bit about the report before I hand over to Ruth Darson. I'm glad you got here. Just come up from Melbourne. So as you know, I'm the National Children's Commissioner. I've been in the role since 2013, and it's just such a privilege to have this job. I get to talk to young people and kids. That's the best bit. But I also get to put on the national agenda issues of real concern and real gravitas about children, and encourage us to become champions, all of us, of children's rights, to understand that they exist and to empower young people to understand and embrace their own rights, because that keeps them strong and makes them strong. But I do want to begin speaking about one of these wonderful artworks that's that was submitted to me, and it's just over there as part of the art competition I ran. This work is, and I asked them to show me how they felt, what they wished for and what they needed. So this work is called In Captivity, and the dark shape floating in the middle represents a killer whale. And the young person used ideas of colour to reflect feelings in the black shape, which was the whale, to represent himself. And he'd been learning about Tilikum, the orca that was kept in captivity at SeaWorld, and eventually, after years of trauma, killed his trainer. Viewing this painting for the first time was pretty emotional for me. To me, it appears the whale is lost, hope or direction. He's trying to swim up to the surface, but his path is blocked. And the water around him is a whirlpool of emotions. And the message of the story is clear. For children, experiences of trauma and abuse have a lasting legacy. So this year, as you know, the main focus of my report was a national review of the treatment and oversight of children and young people in correctional detention across Australia. And the information I collected was assessed against the criteria for the OPCAT that we've already talked about before. And the purpose of this OPCAT is to assist countries in implementing the Convention Against Torture. Australia's been a party to this since 1989. And in particular, it seeks to prevent mistreatment through comprehensive and transparent oversight systems. And thus, it seeks to prevent the kind of shocking images we've seen this year and were hard to believe were happening in contemporary Australia. The OPCAT applies to all places of detention and closed environments like prisons, youth detention centres, police cells, secure mental health facilities and aged care facilities. Secure environments like these create particular power imbalances and vulnerabilities, which require careful monitoring and a high level of transparency to prevent abuses from occurring. And when you add children into the mix, it heightens that risk and vulnerability. And we've seen that through the other Royal Commission into institutional abuse against children, sexual abuse against children in institutions. You know, where cultures can develop that are, you know, about power and control and covering up. And we really need to make sure that doesn't happen. The OPCAT, as Gillian mentioned, sets out a monitoring system made up of two complementary bodies at both the internet and activities at both the international and national level. There's a UN subcommittee on the prevention of torture, which is a team of international experts that would periodically visit and provide advice in Australia. And there's a national preventative mechanism which would draw on the routine oversight work within Australia and issue regular reports. It's likely that there'd be one overarching body at a national level that coordinates the different delegated bodies in each jurisdiction to do this. And I specifically looked in this report at how each jurisdiction measured up in relation to the OPCAT criteria for a national preventative mechanism. And this was to identify the main challenges moving forward and to highlight ways that different jurisdictions can learn from initiatives and practices in other states and territories. It's not all bad news out there, and we can learn from each other. There are good practices out there, and I have to acknowledge that. but there are also some poor practices. And ultimately, while most jurisdictions have bodies and processes that meet some of the NPN criteria or the National Preventative Mechanism criteria, no jurisdiction at present meets all of them. Therefore, there's going to need some reviewing of policies and practices and even laws in order to bring them into line. For example, some jurisdictions have independent inspectorates, but there's a question about the extent of their independence from government departments running the youth justice system. Many jurisdictions rely on ombudsmen, which are independent and generally have strong powers, at least in relation to investigations. However, they do not all have a mandate to regularly visit youth justice centres and tend to play a more complaints-based role. So the damage is already done by the time they're looking at the issue. Most states and territories have children's commissioners or guardians, but many are not specifically mandated to undertake inspections or access public information, or publish public information. All jurisdictions have reporting requirements to varying extent for things like use of force, restraint and isolation. However, these are often not comprehensive and often prescribed as policy rather than in legislation. And they mostly do not come with any requirement for transparency. And that is, there's rarely any public reporting of these records. So we don't know what goes on, and I think that's a very worrying issue. Even the jurisdictions with some of the more comprehensive and public reporting appear to be falling somewhat short in practice. For instance, in New South Wales, there's compulsory reporting of segregation to the Ombudsman, but it does appear, even in that context, that a number of young people have been kept in solitary confinement for extended periods of time. And we know that solitary confinement for young people is very damaging in terms of neurological and psychological and even physiological outcomes for them. So to sum up, the legislative and regulatory regimes in all jurisdictions do need reviewing and tightening up, and that is one of the recommendations I've made in my report. I'll be urging the governments in all the states and territories to make use of my report, and I hope it will be useful for them because it does provide a bit of an initial stocktake on what's going on in those different jurisdictions. And to use the OPCAT framework in undertaking any reviews and refining their systems. And this would help to ensure a more systematic human rights-based schema of safeguards for protecting the rights of children and young people who are incarcerated. As part of this year's work, one of the joys that I had was to consult with children and young people about their rights in detention and make sure their rights were being met. While they were there. I spoke to nearly 100 children and young people in youth justice and adult correctional facilities across Australia, and they also completed a survey for me. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about some of the things young people told me. Most children and young people I spoke to knew they had temporarily lost their right to freedom. That was pretty clear to them. There were bars and a locked gate. But they were largely unaware that they had other rights. In fact, around 31% said they were not told about their rights when they arrived, and a further 33% could not recall if they were told about their rights at all. When I discussed their rights with them, contact with loved ones, education, access to health and professional services were among the rights they most valued. And in particular, I heard about the importance of being respected and the difference that respectful and fair treatment by staff made to their everyday life and in turn to their behaviour towards others. As one young person explained, we aren't all bad people just because we're locked up. During our conversations, the children and young people raised the damaging effects of collective punishment, body searches and the use of physical force. They told me that long periods of segregation or isolation as a form of punishment left them feeling sad, angry and depressed. And one young person said they felt like an animal. The factors which young people felt impacted their well-being in youth detention align with the basic human rights found in major international treaties like the Convention on the Rights of the Child. They may have lost their right to liberty as a result of their criminal behaviour. However, in losing their freedom, these young people have not forfeited their other basic human rights, which are so important to their development as a human being. Undoubtedly, some children and young people are hard to handle. They're not angels, and, you know, teenagers do teenage things. Many come also from backgrounds where they've been exposed to violence, abuse and neglect, and this has contributed to their offending behaviour. But, you know, at times they can be a danger to themselves, including workers and other people, and they can act out and lash out. That's what the teenage brain often does. But treating children in abusive ways and disregarding their basic human rights only reinforces distrust of authority and cements in their mind that violence and aggression is normal. As I said, isolation causes profound neurological and psychological damage, such as depression, panic attacks and cognitive deficits, and is particularly harmful to young people because it impedes the development of the region of the brain responsible for planning, strategizing and understanding consequences. And it's that region of the brain that doesn't really fully mature until they're around 25 or more in some cases. So given all the evidence about how damaging the use of isolation is for children and young people, it's deeply disturbing to me that this appears to be a regular practice in many centres. The main recommendation of this year's report relates to the urgent ratification and implementation of the OPCAT. But I also made recommendations about the development and publication of data that tells us more about the treatment of children and young people and their outcomes. I've also recommended that the age of criminal responsibility be raised in all jurisdictions from 10 to 12. It breaks my heart to know that 10 and 11-year-olds are in jail. Surely we can be more creative as a nation and look at other ways to respond to children who are offending in those age ranges. And this is in line with the recommendations of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. The Convention on the Rights of the Child also explicitly states that children under 18 should not be held in detention with adults. Currently, all jurisdictions in Australia have the legislative power to put children under 18 years of age in adult prisons under certain circumstances. Most jurisdictions told us they rarely do that. And as at June 2015, only the Northern Territory and Queensland had children in adult prisons, 3 in the Northern Territory and 58 in Queensland. And it's really great to see that recent amendments to Queensland's laws mean that we will no longer see 17-year-olds in adult prisons in that jurisdiction. Unfortunately, we've heard in the last few weeks reports that some children are placed or being placed in adult prison in Victoria in response to recent incidents at Parkville. I'm very concerned about the impact of moving any child into an adult prison because the evidence suggests this is likely to worsen the behaviour of those young people and will only expose them to safety risks and criminal associations. It's clear to me that we need to view our treatment of children and young people in detention in an entirely different way. And in particular, we need highly skilled and trained workers who are able to form and model constructive, respectful relationships with children and young people. These children and young people also need specialist programs and activities that emphasise education, rehabilitation, and which recognise and respond to their traumatic backgrounds from which they've come. Failure to do this misses a unique opportunity to influence the developing brain and the evolving human being in positive ways. By neglecting children's rights in these contexts, we're most likely to entrench criminal associations and identities and provide a feeder service to the ranks of the adult criminal system. Not only does this make no sense in terms of building a safe, cohesive society, it's a bad investment that at last count cost around $438 million every year. Finally, in order to ensure that we are never again confronted with what happened at Dundale and Cleveland, we also need to improve how we monitor such places. Strong oversight would ensure that these facilities are run in line with community standards, lift the quality of treatment of detainees, and help prevent abuses occurring in the first place. Because while there should always be consequences for wrongdoing, there's never any justification for the abuse and mistreatment of children, no matter what they've done. Having given you a brief overview of my report, I'd now like to ask Ms. Ruth Barson to officially launch my report with me and talk a little about her own work in the area of youth justice. Ruth is a Director of Legal Advocacy at the Human Rights Law Centre, and she focuses on Indigenous people's rights and broader issues relating to imprisonment, detention centres and the Criminal Justice Centre. She spent a number of years working with the Aboriginal Legal Services in the Northern Territory. In Alice Springs, Ruth managed the youth justice practice and also led projects helping to establish and maintain Aboriginal sentencing in courts. In Darwin, she worked as a policy and advocacy lawyer where she focused on parole and prisoner rights. Both Ruth and I were interviewed as part of the Four Corners program earlier this year. We'd both visited Dundale and understood firsthand what the conditions were like there. So it's very fitting that she's with us here today. Welcome, Ruth.
Thanks, Megan. Probably the shortest person to present today, so I hope you can all see me. I acknowledge that I stand on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my deep respects to their ancestors and elders and to the Aboriginal people in the room today. I acknowledge that this land was never ceded. It's a privilege to be launching the National Children's Commissioner's report today. It could not come at a more important time, when the national gaze is so squarely on youth justice and injustice, but when this gaze is not necessarily translating into the change that we so desperately need on the ground. I've spent the past 2 weeks being what some may say a troublemaker, working on a court case with the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, challenging the lawfulness of the Victorian Government's decision to send children to Victoria's most notorious, most hardened adult jail, Barwon Maximum Security Prison. As Megan mentioned, the decision came after incidents last month at the Principal Youth Detention Centre in Victoria, Parkville, which left a substantial part of this facility damaged. There is no doubt that confronted with this damage, the Victorian Government had and has a policy challenge on its hands. But it's simply implausible that the only solution is a maximum security adult jail for these young people. I've been to a number of youth justice and adult jails around the country. After visiting children in Barwon Jail last week, I can unequivocally say that it's nightmarish and unfit for purpose. Children are in lockdown in their cramped cells for 21 to 22 hours per day, pacing 4 steps up and back. 2 weeks after being there, they are only yesterday allowed to be taken outside for 15 minutes per day, the first time they have seen the sky in 2 weeks. The rest of their time is spent in a concrete room the size of about half of this room with no natural light. What was most striking about being there and talking to clients is that all spoke about missing going to school and attending programs. Whereas 2 weeks earlier they had been detained in a youth-appropriate facility and were completing their Year 10 or a certificate or VCAL, they were now literally left in their cells staring at the ceiling. Quite remarkably, on Tuesday, the day before the court case, the Victorian Government settled the case by making an extraordinary promise to the Victorian Supreme Court. As lawyers, acting in our client's best interests, the settlement offer was too good to refuse. It included a promise not to transfer any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander children to any adult jail for the next 12 months, the lifespan of Barwon Prison. There was one carve-out, that in exceptional circumstances, the government could seek the advice of the Aboriginal Children's Commissioner that the transfer was in the best interests of the child. The effective result is that the Victorian government has promised to protect the safety of only one group of children while permitting the ongoing mistreatment of another. Today, there remains at least 20 children in Barwon Adult Jail, and this weekend, I'll be going out to see them. Importantly, promising not to harm Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children by transferring them to an adult jail should not be allowed to be chalked up as the Victorian government taking a principled position to address Indigenous peoples over imprisonment and injustice. This settlement was simply the government reversing a terrible policy decision that should never have been made for only one group of children. It is the government choosing to act decently in respect of only one group of children. Without a doubt, the fact that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people continue to be 24 times more likely to be locked up than non-Indigenous young people is a critical human rights issue that must be addressed urgently. I echo the recommendations in this report that justice targets are needed, that a national strategy is needed, and most importantly, that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and organisations must be resourced and consulted in the process. The toxic law and order debate surrounding the Victorian government's decision to transfer young people to adult jail is not too dissimilar to the one that was occurring in the Northern Territory when the horrors of Don Dale were unfolding. A political race to the bottom where children in detention were demonised and each side of politics were fighting to appear tougher on crime. While Victorians, progressive Victorians, would likely balk at any analogy between the current Andrews Labor government and the former Northern Territory Country Liberal Party, the response of moving young people to a maximum security adult jail is all too familiar. After the now infamous Don Dale tear gassing riot, the former Northern Territory government, the Country Liberal Party, gazetted Berrima Adult Jail as a youth justice facility. At that time, advocates also spoke up. Similar to the current Victorian government, the then Northern Territory government beat the law and order drum to assuage a public baying for punishment. I worked on the Don Dale case for almost 2 years prior to the Four Corners screening. It was on the back of being in the Northern Territory with the Aboriginal Legal Services for 5 years. In that time, I saw children sentenced to detention without any proper assessment of their cognitive capacity. I saw countless examples of mistreatment with too little recourse to appropriate complaints mechanisms. And I saw children in detention denied any opportunity to access proper education and programs, and therefore to have any opportunity to reach their potential and to get their lives back on track. These two examples of a Victorian Labor government on the one hand and a Northern Territory Country Liberal Party on the other, both similarly disregarding children's rights, is a compelling reminder of why we need stronger institutional protections. It was during my time, first in Western Australia with the Aboriginal Legal Services and then in the Northern Territory, that I came to fully appreciate just how integral independent oversight and prevention mechanisms are, of the need for the Australian government to finally ratify OPCAT. This reminder has again, unfortunately, been reinforced over the past 2 weeks in Victoria. Without ungagged, fearless, independent advocates and office holders, The voices and experiences of children in detention can too easily be ignored. As we've seen time and time again, children in detention can too readily become the political playthings of governments determined to win votes at any cost. The Children's Commissioner's report is a critical addition to human rights discussion in Australia. It is a reminder of how far we still have to come, how far we still have to go, that Australia remains in breach of its human rights obligations on a number of fronts. These include, and Megan's mentioned some of these, all jurisdictions continue to allow for the use of solitary confinement, an archaic practice that evidence shows can result in irreversible and irreparable psychological and physiological harm. All jurisdictions continue to allow for the routine use of restraints and strip searches on young people. And all jurisdictions maintain the age of criminal responsibility below the internationally accepted minimum of 12 years. So, may this report be a springboard for us to address these and other injustices. May it remind us that cruelty can never ever be justified, not for one moment. May it shine a light on the direction our advocacy should take. I've worked in the sector for close to a decade and I couldn't count the number of times a young person in detention has told me that they feel like they're being caged like an animal. Yesterday was one of them. With COAG meeting next week and youth justice being on the agenda for the first time, and with the Northern Territory Royal Commission and inquiries being held into youth justice throughout the country, this report and its central question of how these injustices can continue in this day and age could not be more timely. Australia was galvanised in a rare way after witnessing the brutality taking place in Dondale. As advocates, as human rights defenders, as human beings, our job is to not only address the gap between ignorance and awareness. Armed with this report, we must now hold our governments, our decision makers, to account for bridging the gap between awareness and meaningful, long-standing change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you to all the other advocates in the room who care about kids and their futures. They are precious to us, and we need to remember that they need to be treated well to do well. It's pretty basic, really. And, cruelty and abuse and neglect is never justified in any circumstances. They can do challenging things, but, that's where we as adults need to step in. One of the things that kids said to me when I was talking to them in the justice centres this year was that many of them did know how to complain, but many of them didn't want to complain. And they didn't want to complain for two main reasons. One, they were scared of retaliation by the staff, so payback. And the second thing is they thought nothing would happen. We need to make sure that if a child is in distress, if they're willing to speak up, if they're concerned, they have the capacity and they are empowered to speak up, and that someone will help them do that, an adult will, and that will do something about it. We can't have kids thinking our views, our voices don't count. So thank you all for coming. I do have a few gifts somewhere. Are they over there? Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So for Jessie. Thank you. can I thank all our speakers and as well, Gillian and Robin, and also will you join us for morning tea or tea out in the lobby and have a look at those artworks. Thank you.